What's going on, everybody? This is Jeff Hillen with Selling Stories, where we discuss the struggles, successes, and life lessons learned through sales and in sales. You want to hear an impressive resume? Top this. Graduated high school at the age of 9, perfect SAT scores in 2 different languages, and graduated MIT in engineering first in class in an attempt to pour the perfect beer. Josh Goodman, does that sound like you?
Uh, I I gotta say, there's a few things in there that might need to be tweaked, possibly.
So you're saying my research is not correct? I guess I got to go back to the articles. I'm just kidding, everybody. I got Josh Goodman, CEO of Pour My Beer. Josh, thanks for joining me here on Selling Stories.
No problem. Looking forward to the conversation.
So, in seriousness, Josh was a fellow alumni at Shippensburg University, and he had a simple concept. I guess I don't want to steal your thunder, but the guy wanted a drink and saw a business opportunity. So, Josh, if you don't mind telling people a little bit about your background and story of how you came to be the CEO of Pour My Beer, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So back in 2008, I was at a bar with a bunch of friends, and I was in Baltimore at the time, and we could not get a drink. It took about 20 minutes. Actually, we timed it. It took 18 minutes to get a drink. And then as that was happening, I started counting the steps to get a drink, and it took 9 steps from the time we walked in. And rather than complaining about it, I told my friends I had to leave the bar and go write a business plan, uh, which led me to writing a business plan on how to solve this problem. Because I've used it as a dual problem. It was a problem for me as a customer, but the owners were losing out on potential revenue as well. So
And
that
you had
was
never
the
stopped into a bar and thought about something similar. This was just like an aha moment one time.
to preface it, and it's in my book. I was in a dark period, and I was looking for problems, not like trying to start fight looking for problems, but I was looking for problems in the world that had, I guess you could say, the opportunity to solve them. Because I just read a book recently about back in 2008 about finding the problem to build a business off of,
Okay.
and that's all a business is it's a problem solving mechanism.
Yeah.
So that problem, I'm not going to lie, there was a few failed attempts along the way. Being a Shippensburg grad, I use that to my advantage. And I tried to sell carpets to college freshmen because I thought, hey, you're moving into a dorm, you need a carpet. It's a
Yeah.
layup, right?
Yeah.
Um, it wasn't. I lost 15 pounds in the process and a few $1,000s. So,
Yeah.
not all those ideas were the best ones.
No, well, I think you said somewhere I read wins and lessons, not losses. So, I mean, I think that's for anybody to listen to. You learned a lot. So there's steps you go through in life where maybe you don't repeat them, but again, you're paying for education. In some ways, it's more expensive than others, and sometimes it's not always at a university. Sometimes it's through the business world. So you had this idea though, and you thought, I'm going to write a business plan. So what did you do next?
Yeah, so I went home, and I was currently, at the time, I was employed by a staffing company called Modus, and I knew that chapter in my life was coming to an end, but I had not figured out where my energy was going to get put after that. And so yeah, I wrote the business plan, and you know, I after I wrote the business plan, I mean, I literally thought I would be retired in the islands drinking mojitos 3 years from then. I just thought it was the best idea ever in the history of ideas.
Yeah.
There's an article in Entrepreneur Magazine where they said the entrepreneur gods laughed at me. So it was definitely not an overnight success by any means, but there was about 4 distinct chapters within that. I guess going from the idea and getting, I guess, my first sale that I mentioned to you earlier. But it's been a rough ride, to say the least.
So when you got, I mean, I know there's a lot of things we could talk about, but from a sales guy and from a selling stories topic, you got this business, you went through a bunch, I know, and then you finally got your first sale. Did you ever get to the point where you're like, man, this thing is never going to come off the ground, and think about just saying, I got to turn back and go to plan option B, or what was in your mind through that process?
Yeah, I'm a pretty confident guy, and as someone who was successful in several different companies in a sales format, sales leadership roles as well. I mean, I sold Cutco in college. I was the knife guy.
Yeah.
And then the first summer out of college, I sold $250,000 of knives, like kitchen cutlery. So I was like, man, I'm a sales machine. And then when I was going into this, all in kind of selling the self pour concept, I did it like I've always done it. I knocked on doors, I called, I emailed, and that I went 0 for 100. And that's where I could, and I was tracking it, and I was like, man, I've gotten 100 people to tell me no. And usually that means you might have gotten, in my past life, 50 or 60 to say yes along the way, but it
Yeah.
was 100 no's to zero yeses.
Yeah.
And that's where I came up with the idea, well, instead of convincing them to reconstruct their entire business, why not just build something mobile that I could put in to prove the concept?
Yeah.
And that was my first, I would say, win, which I think any entrepreneur, any person starting business, anyone doing sales, you need that one win,
Yeah.
because you put all that energy into it, and you need something to celebrate.
Well, now I know there's a lot of different thought process, but is it fair to say that you offer this as a free product to proof of concept instead of giving somebody a discount, or how did that conversation change?
Yeah, so it was actually a pretty serendipitous situation, because where the bar owner that I was pitching was actually where I probably spent a few $1,000s. I had a little bit of leverage there. I was like, hey, I've spent a lot of money here, so you should spend some money with me. But
There you go.
I let him know that it was a new concept, and he agreed to pay. It was $1,500 a month lease on 2 units. So two of the tables he was going to lease for $1,500 a month. And without giving any secrets away, at the time I was really into craft beer, still am.
Hmm.
And he told me he was going to put Blue Moon and Miller Lite. No offense to Blue Moon or Miller Lite, but I said, you should really put like Trogs or a really good craft beer on there.
Yeah.
And he said, well, the reason I'm going to put Miller Lite on there is because the Miller Lite guy is going to come and spend $500 for a hamburger on Wednesday, every Wednesday that you have this in here. And the Blue Moon guy is going to spend $1,000.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's paid for.
Got it. So that makes sense. Well, I mean, you got that first sale. You probably had a little bit of different motivation behind it now that, again, people aren't looking at you crazy. Like they validated what you thought was a good business idea. So how did things change after that first sale from, the next, I guess, few months and then going forward?
Yeah, so that first sale was back in 2008, or it was a lease, and it was a 6 month lease. It was more of a mental win. And a buddy of mine worked for the Baltimore Sun, so we actually even got it in the Baltimore Sun, which was kind of a big deal.
Hmm.
But it started leading to more opportunities. But I realized the product was terrible, and the last thing I wanted to do was put a terrible product out in the market. So I really didn't pursue replicating that. What ended up happening is I partnered with a great group out of Ireland to bring their product to the United States and distribute that. So it became a different path than I'd originally thought, where I was going to build this business all on my own, and it was going to be me, and I was going to, I guess you could say, figure out how to replicate these self-pour beer tables. But then this Irish company who had already landed a multi-million-dollar deal with Diageo, which is Guinness in Ireland, I presented myself as the best solution to expand to the United States.
Okay.
So being a guy that doesn't mind getting on a plane, they flew me to Ireland. I got to meet him. I'd never been to Ireland before. And they took me on a little bit of a whirlwind trip around the whole island, getting to see their systems, getting to meet them, and came out of that meeting with, they were going to give me a salary to be their director of U.S. operations and build a U.S. company for them. And I always joke about, entrepreneur math, because in Ireland, there's about 7 million people, and they did about $4 million in sales. So, more than half. So the entrepreneur math was, well, the United States has 300 million people. So we should safely do 120 to 150 million, in the first few years with, with the same product.
Yeah.
And talk about just absolute, stupidity.
Well, I was going to say, I was doing some research on you, and I saw some story that came up, something about some trade theft, and it had something, I think, related to this group or these guys. Does that connect the dots at all?
Yeah, like I said, we had a few chapters in the process. And so the Irish group, we found, my business partner at the time was a gentleman named Declan. We're still good friends, but he lives in Philadelphia near where I live now. And his brother is in the financial world in Ireland. And he gave us a heads up that this company in Ireland was filing bankruptcy, like they were closing their business. Now, this was the company that I worked for and was running the U.S. business and funneling money back to Ireland.
Yeah.
So when we became aware of this, we said, well, this isn't good. So we decided to confront them about that. We We got on a plane and flew to Waterford or to Dublin and then drove to Waterford. And yeah, everything in the U.S. was under me. It was the bank account was tied to me, the credit cards were tied to me, the website was tied to me, everything was, tied to me. And before we went over there, I decided I had to cash out on all these rewards points. So my wife and I, another Shippensburg graduate, we ended up staying in a castle called Ashford Castle after we had our breakup tour with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Irish company, which was amazing. They had falconry there. It was a really, really good experience. But to your point, we had agreed to give them, I guess you could say, the keys to the website and everything else in exchange for what they owed us in commissions because they'd never paid us a dollar in commissions for 2.5 years.
Yeah. Wow.
And rather than paying us the 100,000 that they owed us, they sued us for millions of dollars federally, which when you're starting a business and you're just getting off the ground, getting sued federally is not a great igniter for your success.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I mean, fortunately, I haven't been suited to that capacity in any means, but in all seriousness, like that happens, and is your reaction almost like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough money to fight these guys? Like, am I out of business before I even start, or were you just like, screw this? Like, I know I'm due.
Well, we were fortunate that we'd landed a few deals pretty quick out of the gate. So Declan and I, we probably landed about $80,000 in deals right away from starting our new company, Pour My Beer.
Okay.
And so we had a little bit of cash. So that gave us, I would say, more confidence going up against it. But we did end up taking out a business loan through M&T Bank to really help us kind of get through that because, they always say the only person that wins in a legal battle is the lawyers. So the karma of the whole thing was they ended up going out of business because they sued us, lost, and they actually never even paid their lawyer that they retained to sue us.
Wow.
So it was kind of a win in a lot of ways, not financially, like we
Yeah.
lost $50,000 that we didn't need to lose that early on in the game, but it was definitely a grit tester.
I know for sales professionals that are in this, and I'm not saying all organizations that you work for are a problem, but let's say you do work for an organization where you have maybe some not fuzzy warm feelings because again the market's changed things. Like look at the financial crisis, right? You have some companies. I was in college when Lehman Brothers went out, and there was kids that were at school that didn't know if they could go back to ship the next year because all of a sudden they couldn't get student loans. Like it was a real thing. So if you're a salesperson, you're working for a company and you have some maybe concerns like they're not paying you commissions, and what would you tell somebody with some of the stuff that you went through if you have any concerns about somebody you're partnering with or an organization you're working with, if things change or you're just not getting what you thought should be good answers?
I feel like it all comes down to having a good agreement initially. I would also say don't have agreements with people internationally because they don't really have to stick to any agreement necessarily.
Okay.
Uh, you're much more protected in the United States as an employee in that regard. And then my lawyer always jokes. He was like, you're a team player, but not everyone's a team player.
Yeah.
And I think that's really tough for me even today to wrap my head around. Like, why not work as a team? Whereas I think a lot of people in businesses they are out for themselves, and unfortunately, I found out the hard way that these guys didn't have my best interest in mind, and maybe they never intended on paying us the 100 grand. Even if we had stayed and helped growing the company.
Sure. And you started off this business, you had some early successes, but obviously it sounded like you had like a weight put on your back, like having a drug through mud to start off. But you overcame that. But I'm sure you had more challenges. Did you ever get to a point where you looked in the mirror and you're like, man, I'm not sure that this is the right thing long term? Did you ever go through some more financial stress, and how did you work through it?
And there was a point. You start a business with a business partner with full intentions of crushing it together.
Mm-hmm.
And Declan, I would say, was an amazing business partner to have in so many ways. A phenomenal salesperson, amazing contacts. But what ended up happening is we went through a pretty dry spell of sales in 2014, and he was at a position where he needed to bring in income for his family, which I totally appreciate and understand. And I was at a position where I was fortunate, where my wife had a reload package, and we didn't have, we had just relocated to Chicago. We didn't need to pay a mortgage or rent for 6 months. And I said, look, the business is going to die if we're paying each other salaries and we don't
Hmm.
have sales coming in. And that was a difficult time because at the same time, we also had a decent amount of debt. So, when we would sell a system, let's say for 30,000, it was going to cost us 10,000, but a lot of times we wouldn't pay until we got paid.
Yeah.
So, sometimes that like there was a few times where we purchased a whole lot of coolers through this company called Glass Tender, and we had a bill close to 100,000 with them that we had to pay, and we only had probably 10 or 15,000 in our checking account. And I remember after going about 2 or 3 weeks solid of just, busting out 200 calls a day, calling selling as much as I possibly could, and just really not having much success. And I came upstairs at our house in Maryland at the time, and I was just really talking negative about myself. And my wife was in the room. I was saying things like, "Oh, I'm the worst salesperson alive. I'm such a bad business person. I should just go get a regular job. I'm such a failure in life." And she actually like stopped me and she said, do you understand how unattractive it is to hear you talk about yourself like that? And she didn't say it in a mean way. She just kind of said it in a matter of fact way. And then she said, "This isn't going to be easy, but typically things worth working for
Anything.
aren't."
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
that it allowed me to kind of take a step back, and I also had shaved my head at that time. I think you had referenced to the Instagram post that I'd have there where
Yeah.
I was on Bloomberg within a few weeks of this whole ordeal happening. So, here I'm on Bloomberg TV giving an interview on a national audience. And I think I said some of my friends probably assumed I was doing very well. But in reality, I was fighting some demons and just trying to stay alive.
It's very difficult when any salesperson, I'm sure as a CEO slash salesperson, when you're just trying to get off the ground and get some money in your pocket just to survive is even a different level. But I mean, was there anything besides even what your wife gave you that motivation? Is there anything you took from that and saying like, hey, sometimes you just got to stay in the game? Is there any advice you give to the salespeople that are struggling, that aren't getting the wins, hearing no way more than they're hearing yes? Is there anything you took from that on the flip side of not having all the success like you did early on in your other careers that you can, learn from and give advice for going forward?
I think it's important to take a step back. And for me, I've always found that release to come through sweating intensely, like going on a very long run or a very long bike ride or a very long workout. Uh, for me, I'm able to, it gives me a restart, like a reboot.
Yeah.
So, I would say no matter how hard you're working, find time to sweat, find time to separate. Maybe it's going for, in Maryland, we live right next to this NCR trail. In Chicago, we lived next to another trail that was like an old railroad. And I don't know, here now in Harleysville, where I live, there's an amazing trail network. So I've just always found it helpful to separate yourself from the situation, go on a 2 hour bike ride or an hour long run, sweat, and just listen to a book or listen to a podcast that's uplifting, to some
Yeah.
degree. Um,
The other thing, I have sales guys, and in sales, sometimes the difficult thing is you forget how good you've done and you focus a lot of times on the nose. But, and I'll give you an example, like in our business, so the business has grown leaps and bounds over the last few years. And so if you look at last year, which was an absolute record year for anybody, the industry's booming. Sometimes that new normal isn't always going to grow by 50%. And it gets difficult to go back to maybe a step below where you hit all time highs. But if you look back 5 years before that, that would be like an all time record you can't even imagine hitting. So sometimes in sales, even though you want to get wins all the time, you want to set new records, you want to make more money than you ever had. Sometimes you have to look back at where you came from and realize, like, you know what, I am doing well. Look at all the things I've done to be successful to this point. And sometimes you just don't beat yourself up over the instantaneous no that you might get because, like you said, if you're shooting high, if you're going after big accounts, it's not easy. They're going to hear no's. That's part of the game. So sometimes you got to look back, take a step, and say, you know what, I've done a lot of great things, and I should be proud of that.
yeah, especially now, not to fast forward too far, but having over 500 locations that have implemented our technology globally, and seeing ex-employees who move back to Australia and are doing north of 120,000 a month in revenue with our technology. It's I'm so proud of sticking it out the way I did, but also of the people that I've gotten to meet along the way. I've got so many amazing stories from the people that I've met, and again, 2015 it was just me. So
Yeah.
2000, not to you know, skip too far ahead, but 2015, after all that stuff with Declan and kind of restarting, it was just me. So I was selling, installing, supporting, collecting, troubleshooting. Every job that exists today with our company, I was doing by myself. I built the website. I was doing the YouTube videos. I had my kids doing videos on how to install it. I was taking phone calls at 11 p.m. I was stepping out of movies to help customers because I knew that if I couldn't support these customers and we had prospects and they wanted to know, hey, I'm concerned about working with this company, I think it's only a one person company. And
Yeah.
if they respond and say, well, I don't know how many people they have, but we never have problems. And whenever I call, they pick up. And it's a great system. And we enjoy working with Josh.
Yeah.
And that first 5 or 10 deals, it snowballed, and then you bring on a few key team members and you instill the same, I guess you could say, values that you have. And I use a bit of a playbook. I got it from a guy named Cameron Harold. It's called Vivid Vision.
Okay.
You write down your vivid vision. You take a like a DeLorean, back from Back to the Future.
Yeah.
You jump into the future 3 years and you write everything about your company that's happening, who's in it, how big it is, what type of systems and people are running it, and your customers, and any big significant wins you're going to have along the way. And it's amazing by just having that vision, how you're more likely to stick to it, and your team members are aware of where you're trying to go. So
Yeah. You said something there too, Josh, which I think is really important for a lot of salespeople to hear. And you don't necessarily have to be a CEO to have the same value. It's really important for customers to believe that you know a lot more than just sales. And when you said, hey, I know the system, the troubleshooting, I know everything behind it. If you're a salesperson and you think you're not going to have problems, you're wrong. And if all you do is say, hey, I'm in sales, that's not my job, that's somebody else's thing to worry about, then you're going to lose a lot of respect from people. You're not going to get repeat business. And you want them to think, I have a problem, I'm going to call Josh, or I have a problem, I'm going to call Jeff. That's what you want from a customer. You want them to think of you, that no matter what the issue is, they think of you, that you're going to solve that problem. And for people that don't have that mentality, it's hard to believe that you're the right person to solve that problem. And they're not going to come to you with big projects. They're not going to come to you with things that you can make a lot of money from, because frankly, they think of somebody else that can do it. So you telling that is really, really important and impactful for people to understand.
no, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I believe that having that knowledge of the product to that level and that degree. I mean, it's a. I always say I want all of our team doing installations. I want salespeople, operations, leadership. Like everyone should be doing installations, because they should be able to walk on a location, and if they say we're having this issue, they can identify it and they can
Yeah,
fix it. So yeah, that's an absolutely great point. And now in my previous sales jobs, I didn't understand staffing the way I understand self-pour systems. That's one. I understood people,
yeah.
but the staffing side was a little bit more complicated.
So now you mentioned that you guys have grown leaps and bounds, and you said you started with business with vivid vision, looking 3 years out. So now, is that something that you recreate? Because now you're like, hey, I'm going to look at what 3 years looks like now compared to then. Is that something that you constantly reevaluate?
Yeah, naively, I don't say naively, but I wrote the Vivid Vision in December 2019 for the next 3 years. So it was taking a leap into 2023, which it's currently 2023.
Yeah,
But what I did not account for in 2020 was the global pandemic. So I
sure.
had to rewrite. So I have Vivid Vision 1 and Vivid Vision 1A.
There you
So
go.
I rewrote the Vivid Vision after the pandemic kind of slowed down, and I recently rewrote it for 2025.
Okay.
And again, we've just changed from pour my beer to pour my bev. As you may have either have listed on the podcast, we sold 25% of our company to Coca Cola, so we're an all beverage company. And now we have 27 people full time employed with the company, and we're continuing to grow.
Was that something, I want to ask about that, because, pour my beer is very specific. And now when it's pour my bev, obviously it opens up different doors. Was that something where, you kind of saw, hey, here's an opportunity. Am I going to stick with pour my beer? It's going to be this. Or did somebody say, man, like, you're in a great market, but here's a way bigger, different market you can get involved in. That's why Coca Cola. And what's the background there?
The parent company's name has always been Innovative Tap Solutions. And
Okay.
then Declan and I came up with the name Pour My Beer, really kind of, I don't want to say in desperation, but we had written down like 100 names. And I think I just blurted it the one time. He was like, yeah, let's go with that. And so we went with Pour My Beer, uh, because again, we were all about getting beer to people.
Hmm.
Even before then, I think we had done some wine on tap, but it was still fairly new in the early 2010s. But not until the pandemic, when I had a friend of mine took over a project that it was like a dream project, but it was one of those things that we just didn't have time for. But I wanted to collect all the data from all of our customers and see what was the most poured beverages across all 12,000 lines. And when we did that, we found out that margaritas were the number one selling product across all of our systems.
Would you have
Uh,
guessed that it was even in the top five or no?
no, I mean, we're Pour My Beer. Like it had to be
Yeah.
beer, right? Like it's
Yeah.
I felt ashamed to have a company named Pour My Beer, and it's margaritas that are selling the most. Actually, it was margaritas, and then the second was Moscow Mules.
Wow.
So clearly, cocktails were a big hit, and that wasn't really the what kicked things off. The Coca Cola investment spurred us down that path a little faster than I think we would have gone otherwise. But
Yeah.
we've got 200 locations going up in Spain right now, where it's self serve Coca Cola products. So you go to Burger
Wow.
King, you order your Whopper, and you get a QR code on your receipt that lets you pour drinks for an hour.
Hmm.
Um, so it's I still believe there's a lot of legs there within the United States, but it was Coca Cola Europe that made the investment in us. Hence the reason we're doing the European projects.
That's amazing. Now, if you don't mind me asking, if you just pull the curtain a little bit in the next 3 years, what do you see differently from your organization that you want to achieve?
Well, without giving any secrets away, we are
Yeah.
starting to make some traction in the stadium space. So
Okay.
I see us being a larger factor in that world. So when you go to a stadium, you'll be able to pour your own drinks, all beverages, beer, wine, cocktails, non-alcoholic. Where we've signed national contracts with Marriott, Hilton, IHG. So I see us continuing to grow and expand within those markets. So when you go to a hotel, your room card is what gives you access to pouring beverages, and those charges automatically show up in your room. Any of those resorts, Great Wolf Lodge,
Yeah.
Kalahari, you having kids, it was kind of a knock on the head when we went to the Kalahari up in the Poconos. I was like, we should be in here. This is a no brainer.
It's funny.
Um,
Yeah. Round
so yeah,
two. Yeah.
yeah,
You saw the opportunity. There's so much wasted opportunity here. Why are we not here? Yeah.
exactly. They even give you a wristband, so you get a wristband. It's like, and I actually brought the wristband back to our warehouse in Ambler, and it works with our system. So I was like, this is a no brainer. So
Yeah.
really, anywhere there's a line, there's an opportunity for us. So
Yeah.
hotels, airports, every stadiums, everything.
Sky is the limit. And maybe even, who knows, like with all the things going on with space travel, maybe even the sky is not even the limit. You just never know.
But, my big goal is to get in the Cub. I still haven't landed the deal with Shippensburg to get in the Cub. I gotta work
Oh
that
my
out somehow.
goodness. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, you move back to Hardersville, Pennsylvania. I mean, you see how much beer they go through at Phillies games when they run up to the World Series. So, I mean, if the Fighting Phils are coming back alive, the town is
Well,
excited again. So we'll see.
depending on when this comes out, we do have a soft commitment for the playoffs to have our systems in place. So
There'll be a
Philly,
lot of fluid going through those lines if that happens. So I'll be
we're gonna put
excited.
it put a true stress test on it.
Exactly. Exactly. So you wrote a book, and I wanted to ask you about the, why did you write the book, and who do you think your book is for?
Well, I decided to write the book when 100% of our customers closed in March of 2020, and I had no idea whether what this was going to lead to. But
Okay.
when you're a company that makes revenue off of your customers being open,
Hmm.
it was a challenging period. So I decided to write the book to really just I told so many stories to so many people, like actual stories of the experiences that I've been through. A lot of people had said, "Dude, you got to write a book. Like these are great stories." And I shared a few on here, but I mean, one was where one of my only employee got caught with 150 pounds of weed, and then I had to go jump on a plane and do an install in Seattle, and another one in Boston. in a week while I had a 2 and a 4 year old at home.
Yeah.
Um, so you go through all these experiences. So I decided to put it all into one book. Also, there's that comment of, you're an average of the five people you hang out with. Well, I
Hmm.
had joined an entrepreneur group called Mastermind Talks because I'd hit a threshold of revenue that allowed me to even apply for it. But then you also have to not be like an a-hole to join. So I felt like I checked that box
There
too.
you go. Yeah, I
And
would say knowing you for a little bit of time, I think you should get the VIP card. But
but they so I got into this group and everyone had written a book, and some
mm,
of them were New York Times bestsellers, and I was like, I'd always thought it was just something I never thought it was something I could do or would do, but they showed me the path. I did it. And again, the book was really designed it wasn't specific to just entrepreneurs, just hospitality. It's more of an adventure, I would say. Like if you, there's friends of mine who said they haven't read books in 15, 20 years and said they couldn't put it down. Like it was literally like it was a movie that you just didn't want to stop watching.
yeah, cool.
And you wanted to know what was about to happen next. So
Yeah,
it's very unfiltered. It goes through the darkest periods of building this business, darkest periods of me personally. Without giving the story away, my son had a 11-inch tumor on his spine. He had to get removed literally 2 months after we closed the deal with Coca Cola. So you talk about this extreme high, and then being told your son may never walk again, and
oh
you
man,
you like you just kind of freak out. But
for
it just
sure.
takes people through that whole experience. And again, we've come out the other side of it, and my son's super healthy, the business is healthy, and
Awesome.
everything's good.
Well, I didn't tell you this yet, but a little surprise. I'm gluten free, so I really appreciate. And listen, I don't know how I didn't know in college because I'm telling you what, if I did any more natty ice or natty light, I mean, I'm not sure my body could handle it. But knowing now that was just, I thought I just had to have a Chinese buffet on Sunday after the effects of Saturdays. Apparently, that didn't help me either. It's just all downhill. But knowing that I can get different fluids through your lines is extremely important. So thank you for thinking of people like me because there's a lot of people now that are looking for different options. So it's cool knowing that two of them aren't even beer is even more eye opening.
Yeah, our CTO is gluten free too, so he's got your back on that.
Perfect, perfect. Now I'm going to ask one final question, and it's an important one because this is for primarily salespeople, and you have a perfect DNA of your sales background. So for somebody that's either thinking about getting into sales or somebody that's struggling in sales, what advice would you give them?
What I love about sales is, and I said this in my book too, but I love that you get paid on your results.
Mm-hmm.
You're not trading hours for dollars. You're trading performance. You're no different than a pro athlete in a lot of ways. And I think that's, as someone with an athletic background, I genuinely like that. Uh, and the same thing with being a pro athlete. You got to put the work in. So sending an email to a customer and saying, "I'd like to do business with you," versus learning who they are, where they went to college. Do you have any friends in common? What are their interests? And approaching them in a way that's more thoughtful, to start a conversation, not a sales pitch.
Yeah,
I'm just such a believer in connection. And if you can connect to that person and, a sale becomes a byproduct of that connection, great. If not, who cares?
yeah,
Having that mentality that you're out there to create connections, not sales, and the sales will come if you create enough genuine connections. And that's yeah, I mean that's really been the theme throughout my entire professional career with whether it's selling when I was in corporate sales, or even like when you become an owner of a company, you're not just selling the customer, you're selling your team on the vision, you're selling vendors on giving you credit, you're selling
yeah,
uh you're selling you're going directly up against your competitor, and you got to sell them on why you versus them. And even in certain situations, one of the toughest sales I've had to make was getting point of sales companies to integrate with us. So
hmm,
you know getting to know them, and letting them see you're a real person with real kind of genuine interest in them. I mean, that's really what separates, I would say, an okay salesperson from a great one. And don't beat yourself up on the numbers. Know that they're always going to improve, but there's also stories behind numbers. I used to get kind of annoyed when they would highlight a salesperson who was killing their numbers, but it was because they were given this amazing account. So they always glossed over, oh, look at look at Lee, like he's crushing it. He's 400% of quota. Well, guess what? When you give Lee an account that's going to keep buying from him every month, whether he goes in there or not, like,
Yeah. No,
like
it's a good
don't,
point. It's a good point.
so,
And I was going to
yeah.
say something you said, which again, it's sometimes the simple things are the most important things. But in today's world, you have so much technology, you have so much availability and information at your fingertips. But what can you do to separate yourself in a way that's different than an AI chatbot message that everybody's getting? And frankly, like, I wasn't sure whether or not you were going to say yes to doing this podcast with me. We both ship alum, but you didn't sign some agreement that says if somebody after you graduate reaches out to you, you have to say yes to at least 50 people. So I didn't know if you're going to say yes, man. I know you're busy building an incredible business, but I knew one thing. I was going to take time to find out a little bit more about you before I reached out. And I was also going to expect that you weren't going to say yes just because I messaged you one time on, LinkedIn. I was going to take, not crazy and send you 7 messages every 2 days, but I was going to potentially say, hey, man, like I see something you put out on LinkedIn. That's pretty cool. I'd follow back up with you every once in a while because I wanted you to join me on my podcast episode. And I was going to keep track of you and figuring out ways to do that until you said yes, because I'm a sales guy and I wasn't going to stop. So people need to hear that too, because people are busy. You have kids, you have family, you got a business. I'm sure you get inundated with a lot of people asking you for things without much in return. So it's important people realize, like, what can you do to separate yourself?
Yeah, and it all comes full circle. I mean, when your business is crushing it in a few years, or I think the key is always being somewhat accessible,
Yeah.
and being unique. Like I think that if you hadn't continued to follow up, I wouldn't. I mean, there's 1,000 emails that come in my inbox every few days, so it's like,
Yeah.
But even going back to that being unique is like I just recently sent a video message to a prospect. I used something called Loom. It's free, but I video messaged like an actual message to them about why I'd like to have a meeting and something kind of an incentive if they respond. And to be quite honest, I saw that they clicked on the link. I haven't gotten a response yet. Does that mean
Yeah.
I'm never going to do it again? No, but like and I'm going to keep going at them. I just sent them a care package with like 6 books in it today with a personal handwritten note saying I'd like to, whether we ever do business together or not, like here's some books that someone in your team would enjoy.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great to hear. And like you said, just because you're Josh Goodman CEO now doesn't necessarily mean that everybody just says, oh, yes. Like it still takes work. Like you still got to get up and you still got to hustle.
Yep.
So, yeah, man, like, again, I really appreciate everything that you've said here today. Again, being selfish on the other end of this thing, I'm jacked up to be able to go out and crush it, especially your inspiration that you've done, fellowship alum, but also just somebody in business that saw an opportunity and was willing to risk everything for it. So that's super inspirational. So thank you for being a beacon of light for people and hope for blazing that path.
No problem. And I'm pretty accessible. I mean, you got my I'm on LinkedIn, but tapthebigidea.com for the book. If anyone decides to get it, and hashtags, we do have a special kind of prize that we give out on a monthly basis for the best post. But go to one of our locations. We got 400 of them. I'm sure there's one near you.
I was going to say the easiest way to find it would just be how?
Beer.com
Okay.
/locations.
Cool.
That's probably the best way to find a location near you. But if you message us through social media, it's funny because my mom will message me through social media, and I don't manage our social media anymore. So I'm like, Mom, you're talking to our social media team. That's not me.
She's like, well, I should be able to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, so it's I would go online and look for a location near you, and I encourage you to experience it. If you're we just put out our top 43 locations, and we've got some amazing locations. I mean, in the PA area, you've got Hollywood Casino that's right there in York. It's got our systems. I'm trying to think of other ones in PA. We need a better presence in Harrisburg and that area. It's an uncharted waters for us to some
There you
degree.
go. Listen, people listening to this show, we need to get the support going. So if you're in the central PA market and you just are tired of waiting like Josh was one day, and you're like, there's got to be a better way, there is. And his system's the path for that success.
Tell Arugas that they need self-pour. That's a big one there.
There you go. Yeah, we'll see what we can get. But no, Josh, thank you so much for your time, your stories, and yeah, also your struggles, man, because people learn through that too. So yeah, this is Jeff Hill and Josh Goodman with Selling Stories. Everybody, make it a great day. Thank you.